It's a huge honour to join you here today, and I want to pay tribute to the Justice Campaign for its work over many, many years defending working class and minority communities. It's a huge positive example that this campaign sets, not just for Liverpool, but for the whole country. So my congratulations and thanks to the Justice Campaign. Today I want to set out two ideas about an alternative economics. Two ideas that I think the labour and trade union movements need to embrace if we are to have a credible alternative to the Conservative agenda. The two ideas are very simple. The first is economic democracy, and the second is alternatives to austerity. Austerity is the biggest con of our age. We are being told time and time again there is no alternative to austerity. Conservatives say there's a public spending deficit. We have to plug it, and the only way to do that is by cutting vital public services. That is a lie. There are alternatives, and I want to present them to you today in the hope that you will take these ideas out to the wider trade union and labour movement, because we do need constructive, practical, credible alternatives in order to defeat the Conservatives. So here's my suggestions about how we can pursue a different strategy, how we can plug the deficit, save public services, and reboot the economy to ensure better welfare for all. The first is to cancel the high-speed train link HS2. That would save somewhere between 50 to 80 billion pounds. Now, I'm not in favour of connecting all parts of the UK, and I'm very conscious that the North is often under-resourced. But I don't think the economic gains of that huge expenditure have been made or can be made. And therefore, cancelling HS2 on the basis that the practical benefits to people in the North and the Midlands are not established, that would give a saving of 50 to 80 billion pounds for that project. The second is to scrap the renewal of Trident nuclear submarines and missiles, which would save over £100 billion during the 40-year lifetime of those submarines and missiles. Over £100 billion. Again, I'm conscious that it will affect jobs for those who are in the engineering industries contracted to build those missiles and submarines. But I think our alternative should be to argue for the re-transformation of those engineering jobs into socially useful production, into trains, planes, renewable energy, wind turbines. This was set out way back in the 1970s by the Lucas aerospace workers. The trade unions there, opposing the arms trade, said let's convert this industry into socially useful and valuable production. Those ideas and principles still apply today when it comes to alternatives to building Trident submarines and missiles. Third, we could end tax avoidance loopholes on those big corporations who exploit those loopholes in order to avoid paying tax. Their tax avoidance runs at roughly about £30 billion a year. That's £30 billion less the exchequer is getting in order to spend on vital public services. Fourth, we could halt pension tax relief on people earning over £150,000 a year. They don't need that perk, they're quite wealthy enough. And that would bring in an extra £20+ billion every year, possibly as much as £30 billion every year. Fifth, we could introduce a financial transaction tax, the so-called Robin Hood tax. Not only on currencies, but shares, bonds and commodities. If the rate was set at a mere 0.05%, that is 1/20th of 1%, it would raise a staggering minimum of £50 billion and probably closer to £100 billion every single year. It would also have the added benefit of reducing speculation. People who speculate on currency and commodity and bond and share transactions operate at very narrow margins. This financial transaction tax would be a disincentive for them to engage in that speculation. We know that speculation is hugely damaging to the economy. So we not only raise more money, but we reduce speculation to benefit the economic system. The sixth idea is a one-off wealth tax on the richest 10% of the UK population. A one-off wealth tax on assets, not income. It would be an average of 20%, so people at the lower end may only pay 1 or 2%, but people at the very high end would pay perhaps 25 or even 30%. I repeat, it's a one-off tax. And that one-off tax on the richest 10% would raise a staggering £800 billion. £800 billion. Now, these are not poor people. Let's not forget that still today in Britain, 1% of the population owns 70% of all the land. Let's not forget that the richest 1,000 individuals have a combined personal wealth of over £450 billion. Unbelievable. 1,000 individuals have a net worth of over £450 billion. They can afford to pay. We're not asking them to wander around in sackcloth and ashes. They can still keep 5 out of their 6 luxury homes, 9 out of their 10 luxury cars, 7 out of their 8 wealthy holiday villas overseas. They can afford to make a sacrifice. As Spider-Man once said, or I paraphrase from Spider-Man, with great wealth comes great responsibility. Those who have the deepest pockets have the duty to dig in to help get our country out of the economic mess we are in. So those are the 6 alternatives to raise the funds to plug the deficit, save public services, and reboot the economy. So just think about it. The total one-off expenditure that would be garnered would be a staggering 150 to 180 billion pounds from cancelling HS2 and Trident. If we just did those 2 things, there'd be an extra 150 to 180 billion pounds in the government's coffers. Then if we add the total extra revenue raised every year from ending pension tax relief on the very rich, stopping tax avoidance by large corporations, and by enacting a financial transaction tax. That would bring in between 100 and 150 billion pounds extra every single year. Plus we have the one-off gain, the windfall gain of 800 billion pounds from a one-off wealth tax. So add it all up, put all those things together, you're talking about raising an extra 1,000 billion pounds. 1 trillion pounds. That's enough to plug the deficit umpteen times over, and to save vital public services, and to reboot the economy as well. In terms of rebooting the economy, I'm a passionate supporter of the Green New Deal, modelled on Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal in the 1930s in the US. The Green New Deal is a way to reboot the economy and fight climate chaos at the same time. The idea is to invest in energy conservation and renewable energy, to create hundreds of thousands of new jobs, a mixture of skilled, semi-skilled and unskilled. Think about it. We don't need Hinkley Point C. If we had a thorough program of energy conservation for homes, offices, factories, transport and so on, we could cut our energy needs by between 20% and 30%. That's the equivalent of 3 or 4 Hinkley Point Cs. Hinkley Point C is supposed to generate 7% of our energy needs. If we had energy conservation on a serious scale, we could cut back our energy needs by 20 to 30%. And as for renewable energy, already the prices are coming down for wind and solar. And we haven't even begun to invest in wave and tidal technologies. If you remember, in the 1980s, Britain led the world on tidal and wave power energy. We had fantastic cutting-edge scientists and engineers who were leading the way. And when Margaret Thatcher came to power, she cut the funding for all those vital programs. Now we have slipped back in the league table when it comes to tidal and wave power. People say, you know, wind power, it's got its limitations because the wind doesn't always blow. Solar has its limitations because the sun always doesn't shine. But let's not forget that for solar, the sun doesn't have to shine. It's the light alone generates solar. But when it comes to wave and tidal, they are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. Why aren't we investing in this endless, permanent, round-the-clock form of renewable energy? It makes sense. That's where we could divert the jobs that would be building the track for HS2, the jobs that would be building Trident nuclear missiles and submarines. We could divert them into building this new generation of effective renewable energy. And if we did that, not only would we solve our own energy problems, but we would become a world leader, a world beater. We'd be exporting that technology all over the world. And as new orders came in, more jobs would be created in those vital engineering industries. This is the way to save the engineering industry, which has been so decimated by successive governments over the last 3 decades. My appeal to Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell is, I love what you're trying to do, but you really do need to speak out about these practical alternatives. We can't just be an oppositionist movement. We have to have constructive, practical ideas about the alternatives to austerity. And these are some of them. I'm sure greater minds than mine will think of others. But these are ways that we can refute the lie that there is no alternative to austerity. The second issue I want to address is the question of economic democracy. We all expect political democracy. Why not economic democracy too? Let's imagine a society where the economic system was in closer democratic alignment with the political system. It's not impossible. It's easy, it's obvious. All we have to do is to think, imagine, and campaign for it. What I want to suggest is that it's time we extended the economic franchise. It's a simple matter of democracy and justice. Let's just think about it. The economy is in effect a dictatorship. All the votes, all the power is held by the major shareholders, the directors and managers. The shop floor workers have no meaningful say at all. Let's call it what it is. It's an economic dictatorship. Yet without the grassroots shop floor workers, there would be no industry or public service. There would be no economy. So surely, by the rationale of democracy, there ought to be economic democracy as well as political democracy. The leaders of industry and commerce have almost totally untrammeled power. In contrast to the one person, one vote principle that characterizes our political system, in our economic system, the top brass have all the votes. So what I want to suggest to you is some ideas about how we can make the economic system more democratic and accountable. Just a few very brief ideas. I think there needs to be mechanisms for democratic participation and accountability in the way the economy is run, at the level of enterprises, both private and public. So I would say that all medium-sized and large-sized companies and public institutions like the NHS should be required by law to have on their management boards at least 1/3 employee-elected directors and independent directors appointed to represent the interests of consumers. In other words, to involve all sections of society in the running of those public and private institutions. The German Works Council model is a weaker version of what I'm proposing, but it has existed for a long time, where trade unions have representation on German company boards. I'd like to make it stronger and more effective. And just look at the result. Even in Germany, despite the modest scale of those works councils, it does, on the whole, lead to better industrial relations. Because workers who have grievances can take those grievances direct to the company board. They can speak direct to the managers and directors. They can make the case for workers' rights and benefits directly. And they have a vote on those boards. Now, many of you who are a bit older will know that these ideas were actually proposed by Labour in the 1970s. Jim Callaghan, who we used to deride as a right-wing Labour leader, set up a commission appointed under the chairmanship of Lord Bullock to advise on industrial democracy. And he came back with a proposal suggesting that every large company should be required to have 50% worker representatives on the boards, with an independent, neutral chair acceptable to both management and workers. Sadly, that idea was not taken up by the trade union movement, or most people in the Labour Party. and it fell by the wayside, particularly after the 1979 general election defeat. But can you imagine how the industrial landscape would be changed today if we had 50% workers' representatives on the boards? It would rebalance the power between labour and capital. It would be a huge gain for working class people. I'm not suggesting it's a panacea or perfect, but it would fundamentally shift the power balance in favour of organised labour. The other great advantage of having worker and consumer representatives on boards is that they would have inside information about the working of their companies or their public institutions. And they could blow the whistle if they couldn't get redress from within. So, for example, if there had been employee representatives on the board of Northern Rock and RBS in 2008, they would have been able to blow the whistle about the reckless, irresponsible investment decisions being taken by those two banks. They could have potentially saved those banks and saved the economy from the meltdown that we suffered. We wouldn't have had to pour billions, hundreds of billions, into quantitative easing to save those banks. And likewise, with consumer representatives on the board, they could blow the whistle on environmental degradation, on price fixing, and all the other tricks and scams that big companies often use. This is the way of ensuring that people on the shop floor have real power. It's also a way in which we can make our economy more productive. We all know about the scandal of inflated bonuses for bankers. Already highly paid get these huge payoffs for them simply doing their job. I think it's time we said, what about bonuses for employees? And I would introduce a system of bonuses where any employee or group of employees who came up with ways to make their company or public service more efficient, provided it didn't mean cutting services, anybody who managed to achieve that should get a bonus. They should have to get a bonus of 5 or 10% of the money that is being saved. At my local hospital in southeast London, St Thomas's, they used to have an appalling system of appointments. The patients knew it was a waste of time and money, the staff knew it was a waste of time and money, but they told me time and time again, what can we do? We've told management this, they ignore us. If those employees had representatives on the board, they could have taken it direct to the management of St Thomas's Hospital and implemented a far more efficient appointment system which would be for the benefit of not only medical staff but also patients. They also came up with ideas to save money because a more efficient appointment system saved St Thomas's Hospital. When it was eventually implemented, although imperfectly, it has actually saved the hospital quite a lot of money. And that has saved public expenditure. Now I say, those employees who came up with that idea should get a bonus. They should be rewarded for helping to make savings which, without cutting any services, has actually made the appointment system more efficient and at the same time saved the NHS money. So that's one idea. The second idea, very briefly, is the idea of what have sometimes been called wage earners funds. This idea was touted by a Swedish economist, Rudolf Meidner, in the 1960s and 70s. He was an economist for the Swedish equivalent of the TUC. And he came up with the idea that why should companies, when they increase productivity, give all the gains and profits to the management and shareholders? He said that people on the shop floor should also benefit from those increases in productivity. So his idea was that it should be required by law that if a company increases its productivity, a percentage of the extra value of that productivity should be paid into what he called wage earner funds, which are held in collectivity by the employees and the unions. And they could hold them as shares, they could invest them in local communities. It was an idea to make, again, the economic system more democratic, accountable, participatory, and beneficial to ordinary people. This system was, to some extent, implemented in Sweden, somewhat half-heartedly, and it did give trade unions and employees a huge wedge of capital which they were able to use to invest for the benefit of their members and their local communities. That, to me, is the right thing to do. Increases in productivities should not just go into the pockets of the shareholders and management. It has to be shared. The final point I'd say is that how about we have trade union control of pension funds? Pension funds count for close on £1,000 billion of investment. About a third of the stock market. Yet they're controlled or handed over to big corporations to administer. You all know about the big corporations that run pension funds. They are private corporations, profit-making institutions, which have a first instinct to maximise profit for the benefit of their shareholders and directors. And of course, to maximise the gains and returns for the pension fund holders. An alternative idea is that why shouldn't employee organisations, whether it be trade unions or employee mutual societies, why shouldn't they have control of pension funds? And obviously, employ people with expert financial knowledge to administer them, but to ensure that those pension funds are invested in ways that are consistent with the values of the trade unions and the members. So, for example, to not invest in the tobacco, arms and sweatshop industries. To invest in socially useful production, like renewable energy and energy conservation, new medical technologies, things that benefit society. Now, it's very interesting, there's a similar system has operated in Norway for many years. Not exactly the same system, but a sort of similar system. And it is now, I think, the biggest, or one of the biggest, investment funds in the world. And it makes a point of investing ethically, environmentally, and for the benefit of its members. It has invested money in marginalised and depressed communities who have suffered as a result of economic reorganisation. It is hugely successful, and the success and reward is gained by ordinary workers. This, to me, is a much better model than the one we currently have. Again, the system of employee mutual societies or trade unions controlling pension funds will be a way to decentralise the power of capital and to make it more accountable to the people. So there's a few ideas. I haven't got all the answers. Greater minds than mine will probably think of better ways to do things. But we need to break out of the oppositionist mentality of being against things and start arguing in favour of positive, constructive alternatives. Alternatives on austerity and alternatives in terms of economic democracy. It is possible. We can do it. We just need to have the imagination and determination to argue for something different from what is. We need to dream of what could be, not accept things as they are. Not seek piecemeal reforms within the structure of society as it is, but seek to transform that society to fundamentally shift the balance of wealth and power in favour of ordinary working people. Thank you.